am a reformed opera singer. That was my original training, so I'm a performing artist. But in more recent days, so I'm the co-founder of the Human Hive, and the Human Hive is a social enterprise that trains, supports and resources change makers working to regenerate people, places and planet. So we work with individuals, we work with organizations, both in the business sector and the third sector and in education, many different contexts. And a lot of our work is really about creating the best interface between groups of people who might never normally meet. I'm also a qualified trauma therapist, a body-focused trauma therapist, so my expertise is very much about the nervous system and how the nervous system gets overwhelmed by certain experiences. And I'm a certified high-performance coach and a trainer, so I dig into various different areas through my expertise.
So you keep yourself busy then?
I'm pretty busy, yeah. Lots of hacks, lots of slashes.
Yeah, I can imagine. And as we're going through, if people have questions for Darren, please do pop them in the chat. We've got the wonderful Grace joining us from Silicon Brighton, so she's going to help us over there on the chat. But please do share them on there, and we'll come to you towards the end of the session to ask them directly to Darren. But Darren, when we caught up a couple of weeks ago and we started talking about bringing you on to one of these sessions, and we asked you to help us with some of the copy, and it's a really interesting concept, this neurobiology of safety. And one of the first things that you kind of spoke about was how tough the last few years have been on the planet. And I'm very mindful that I don't necessarily want to start the session with a load of doom and gloom, but I do think it's important for us to perhaps contextualize some of the things that are happening at the moment around the world. So I guess my first question to you is, what was running through your head when you were kind of writing those first few words for us?
Well, I agree with you. I'm definitely not a person to focus on doom and gloom, but I do think as a coach, I feel it's really important that we recognize the reality of now so that we can start to build the future that we want. We have to know what we're moving from so that we can reach the goals that we want to reach. And I say this. I talked about kind of the challenge on the planet, and particularly the last 2 years, is because the context in which I work, I see that again and again. I work a lot within schools, with educators. I work very much within the context of displacement, with people going through the refugee experience. I work often with people who are right on the front line of crisis. So as I've said, educators, but also humanitarian aid workers and people in the health industry. I mean, many people who are right there supporting people going through really challenging times. And it's not that what we're seeing at the moment is new. It's that 2 years of lockdown and uncertainty compounded by a huge amount of real instability that we're seeing at the moment. We were talking just before this call about what's happening with the interest rates, what's happening with the war in Ukraine. There are so many things that are destabilizing us. And it means that actually many people's mental health is affected. People who are generally very strong and really able to manage life are finding that they're being rocked. And that's completely normal and human. But I think that we have to acknowledge as business owners and as members of our society that people around us may need more support right now than they have done in the past. We ourselves might need more support than we have done in the past. So I wanted to set that out as our foundation to begin this conversation, to have that as a given, is that whether people are telling you how they feel or not, generally we're all affected by the collective feeling. I call it sometimes in my work the magical invisible cord. The magical invisible cord is the connection that we have from nervous system to nervous system. This is part of our biology as human beings. We are designed to connect to other human beings from birth so that we can work out how to survive within the environment we find ourselves in. And that stays with us all through life. So we are constantly being affected by the nervous systems of those around us. If we are operating in an environment that feels destabilized and unsafe, we're going to feel that in ourselves, whether we are actually experiencing that or not.
Yeah, and you're so right. And, you know, I like to think that I'm quite a resilient person. And, The last few years has certainly thrown a few curveballs and waves for me to ride. But I can't put on the news anymore. If I put the news on in the morning, I have a really, really difficult day.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm always sat in between this, like, I don't want to put the news on because I know that it's going to upset me. And I've shared a few things on LinkedIn recently. Our local food bank is basically empty, and they're getting more referrals from the council than they can actually provide to. So when I see these things happening, you're absolutely right, and I can experience, or I do experience that myself. And one of the things that as kind of people we talk about a lot is psychological safety, and it's a topic that's come up in lots of these conversations as part of the People and Culture Club. And then it's interesting that you brought this slightly different spin, and we had a conversation about, what's the difference between psychological safety and our neurobiology of safety, and I wondered if you could perhaps share a bit more there.
Sure, thank you. Well, they're very, very closely connected, and I suppose for me, maybe it's a matter of semantics. When I think about psychological safety, I'm thinking very much about the processes of our cognitive brain. It's our ability to think and have ideas and work with the environment from that cognitive level. But when we feel unsafe and destabilized, there's a deeper level that we're working from, and that's very much more of a biological, physiological level. So when we are compromised, we feel unsafe or we feel threatened, our biology shifts. And by biology, I mean things change in the rate of our heartbeat, things change in the way that we breathe, the kinds of chemicals that we're releasing into the bloodstream changes. Things, really fundamental things like which organs are operating and which are not. We switch off things like our digestive system, our immune system, our reproductive system, so that we can mobilize energy to defend ourselves. Blood moves into the muscles, away from the center of the body, so that we can be active. Things change in the frequency that we can hear and the way that we focus and direct our vision. So these are all physiological things that happen, and usually are happening underneath the radar of our cognitive awareness, what I might call our psychology. So if we're thinking about disruption through overwhelming experiences, I usually think on three levels. So I think about this biological, physiological level. Then I'm thinking about the psychological, emotional level, like where our emotional set point shifts to. Do we feel more anxious? Do we feel more irritated, frustrated? Do we feel more confused or shut down? These are emotional, psychological states. And then there's a social element as well. The way that we interact with people around us, our ability to relate and connect to human beings, functions of the brain start to change. When we feel very unsafe and threatened, this very important part of our brain behind the forehead, called the prefrontal cortex, begins to close down. And we need this online because this is about our executive function. Executive function is our ability to make choices in the moment. So if this is online, we feel safe and comfortable, then we're able to choose how we behave in the moment. We're able to choose what skills and knowledge and talents we already have and point them at the present moment. We're also able to reach out into the environment, connect to other people and things. So this is very important for us in order to maintain the relationships we have around us, and also to innovate and be creative and learn new things. When we feel anxious and this closes down, we start to operate more from the brain stem right here at the back of the head. And that's much more about reaction. So we go into behavior. And that's a really good way to start to observe whether people around you are feeling unsafe or uncomfortable or overwhelmed, because behavior starts to come out more. 4 very basic behaviors: fight, aggression; flight, avoidance; freeze, stuck, confusion; and faint, complete collapse, no energy, helplessness and hopelessness. So these are kind of the variety, 4 very basic ways we can start to tell whether people are feeling uncomfortable around us. I think I've kind of gone off slightly on the tangent, but I hope that answers the question.
It is so interesting, and I find the neuroscience that, you know, for those of you that know me, know that I'm really interested in kind of from a leadership perspective, and one of the things that I kind of really try and work with leaders around, and actually it's not just leaders, it's important for all of us, is around self-regulation. And one of the things that you mentioned there was about choosing our behaviours is much easier when we're using that executive function and we're not in that fight or flight kind of state. If we find ourselves in fight or flight, or the two other examples that you shared, like I did this morning, trying to get my kids out the door, and my son seems to decide that he can no longer hear when I'm telling him to put his shoes on, and I may have got a little bit cross with him. But what can we do when we're feeling that stress, that anxiety, and we need to choose a better behaviour to influence a more positive outcome?
So, the first things that I always think about is using the body. So when we start to shift out of this state, we're able to make choices, and we're beginning to become more anxious, more irritated. We are starting to lose contact with this place where we can choose cognitively what we need. What we want is to be able to balance ourselves and ground ourselves. So I use a really great framework that I teach with, often called the Mate's House. And the Mate's House is a way of understanding the neurobiology of threat, really. I can just bring that up for a moment, actually. Yeah. So here is the Mate's House. I'm not going to go into a full description of this right now because we don't have time. But basically, we're looking at how our autonomic nervous system works. The autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that is dealing with everything unconscious, the things we're not having to think about that function in our bodies, like heartbeat, breathing, etc., that I talked about before. And we're looking at 3 levels of this house. We have an attic, a living area, and a basement. Where we want to be is here in this living area, because the living area is where we're able to self-regulate. It's where we're able to connect and communicate to other people, where we're able to make choices. But when we feel unsafe or threatened, we tend to shift, often first of all up here into the attic, where we have our mobilised defences, fight and flight, and down here into the basement where we have our we have our frozen kind of defences, our freeze and our faint. So these are different ways that evolution has given us to defend ourselves from attack. So what we need to do, and once we're in either of these places, we lose contact with this filing cabinet here, which represents the prefrontal cortex. So we can't use all the things that we already know and we have at our disposal, because the part of the brain that allows us to do that is offline. So we look instead for these 5 keys here. This is why this house is called the Mate's House. It's because of this lovely acronym down the side. And also because it's come from friends of mine in Australia. It's been designed in Sydney, Australia by 2 fantastic trauma therapists, Robbie Abels and Selene Souza, who shared this with me. So mates in Australia is more than just your friends. These are the people who will save you when you're really in dire need, and that's why they chose this as their acronym. But these 5 keys are really useful ways and very quick ways to help to regulate your nervous system, come back from the attic or the basement back into your living area. So what are they? So M is for mind. It's about how you're directing your attention. A is for air, is about breath. T is for tree, is about grounding and coming into contact with the lower half of the body. E is for express. It's about coming into contact with the feelings you have rather than the story that's driving the way that you feel. And S for stretch is about movement and actually physically stretching the body. Each of those 5 things is a way to hack into the nervous system and help you to re-regulate and come back to contact with yourself. It's a very easy acronym to remember, but they don't have to be done in order. They don't all have to be done. It's just an easy way to remember these 5 things. So let's take one at a time. The mind, can we find a helpful thought? Something that is going to help your body to feel safe and calm. So we might bring into our mind something that we find personally safe and enjoyable. It could be a favorite person or a favorite place. It could be a pet. It could be remembering something like the 5 keys of mates. That could be a helpful thought in itself. Anything that's going to shift your attention away from the thing that's stressing you. That then sends a message down into the biology to stop producing these chemicals of defense and to help us come back into this living area. So that's mind. A for air is about breath. So the two sides of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, the accelerator that gets us ready for action, the brakes that calms us down, they work in parallel, and they go out of sync when we are stressed. But breath is very, very intimately connected with those two sides. So if we can take back control of the breath, we can regulate ourselves. So for this key, what it is to breathe in through the nose, because it means if you're mouth breathing, the kind of fight-flight breath, you have to stop that, close your mouth. So you get a nice energized breath in through the nose, and then you release through the mouth. And what our nervous system is looking for is a longer out breath to in breath, because that then switches back on the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that helps us feel calm and relaxed. So that's a really great thing that we can do. Take a breath and release long and slow. Tree is, again, about the wiring of our nervous system. When we are in our attic or our basement, we tend to be wired more from the diaphragm up, and we're more connected to the upper part of the body. And we lose contact with the lower part, with our feet and our legs. But if we can put attention on feeling your feet on the floor, placing your hands on your lower back, that's kind of the beginning of your lower half of the body, anything that's going to connect you back into grounding yourself downwards, that also then switches on that rest and digest part of the body, of the nervous system. Again, helps you just to feel calmer. And you can do that by walking, by moving, by standing still, by doing a yoga pose. There are different ways that you can kind of just feel your feet on the floor. Just by pressing your feet and scrunching your toes can also really help to activate that again. The E for express is, am I able to say out loud for myself or with someone that I trust the feeling that I have right now? Not the story, which tends, as I said before, drives our defense behaviors, but the feeling can be a physical feeling like, oh, I have a tightening in my chest. It could be an emotional feeling like, oh, I feel really irritated. You can use this. I like this neutral language here within the mate's house, because then you don't really have to explain the actual emotion. Say, oh, I'm feeling really attic-y today, which means you might have kind of a lot of mobilized energy, or I feel quite basement today, which means I might be really shut down. Those can be helpful things, because as soon as you know how you feel, you can choose whichever one of the other 5 keys you need to help you to mobilize and come back into the living area. So really useful. Also, we're switching on different parts of the brain. When we start to communicate, we're turning on the social engagement system, and that really helps us to relax and calm down. Then the final one, the stretch. When we feel stressed, when we feel attic or basement, we tend to constrict the body. So making space in the body by actually stretching out, having a good stretch, taking a walk, changing the environment you're in, all of those things, it's really good. It just gives more space and energy in the body for emotions and things to shift and change. Sometimes it can be really hard to move when we feel that way. So it only needs little tiny things. You can begin with just a kind of a wiggle of the finger, and take the wiggle of the finger out eventually into a proper good stretch. And we don't move enough, especially I spend a lot of my time sitting in front of this computer screen here on my landing outside my bedroom. So it's good to remind ourselves that when we sit still for long periods of time, we do tend to shut down, and that means the brain is shutting down too. So can we take moments to have a little walk, or to just get up and have a stretch, or to maybe do some yoga or do some calisthenics, or whatever kind of movement exercise really works for you. But that really also helps us to ground back into that rest and digest kind of calmer part of the nervous system. So those are 5 key things that you can do to really help yourself in the moment when you're feeling uncomfortable, when you're starting to shift into those behaviors, and to remind yourself that all you need is to come back just through this door. As soon as you're through the door, your prefrontal cortex is back online, and you've got loads of other things that you already do and you already know how to do. You just need to be able to get your brain online so you can remember to do them. And the 5 keys will help you to do that. They're the gateway to bring you into other kinds of behaviours that are going to help you. I'll stop share right now. There we go.
Incredibly helpful. I think so often we talk about some of the science, but it's the practical things, how do I actually manage that in the moment? And I kind of had this light bulb as you were talking through some of that, and I thought, as leaders and at an organizational level, we expect people to behave a certain way when they're at work. And one of the things that I encourage a lot is not just about rewarding kind of performance in terms of have I met my goals or have I met my OKRs, but actually how have I got there? How have I embodied our values and the things that are important for us? But yeah, I don't think I have come across many organizations that actually equip their people with the tools that when they're feeling a certain way that's perhaps producing behaviors that we don't want to see, are we setting them up for success by kind of sharing and educating them on some of those tools? And I guess then I have a question around environments, because we do, and I think it's the right thing to do, that we do hold people accountable for their behaviours. We are adults. But what role does the environment that we operate and we work in play? And as leaders and as people, what can we do to positively influence the right environment?
Well, the first thing I would say is to come back to something that we've both referred to earlier. It's this idea of self-regulation. And self-regulation is only part of the picture. So I think in our culture, very often we expect people to do things for themselves, take care of themselves and manage themselves. And of course, we want to be able to do that. Unfortunately, we have an education system that doesn't teach self-regulation, so we're already at a disadvantage. But self-regulation is only part of the picture because we need other human beings around us. We need other people to help us to regulate if we are feeling really overwhelmed and unable to do it ourselves. And that's called co-regulation. It's the thing that parents do with their kids. It's part of the job and function of being a parent, is that you entrain your child's nervous system by using your own regulation to regulate the child. And then we're learning together. But we need to do that all through our lives. So we've lost the art of community, I think, very much within our society. And the art of community means that we are able to recognize when someone in our group begins to be dysregulated. Dysregulated is when you start to shift out of your living area and begin to go into those behaviors we looked at before. So can we create a culture of well-being by noticing and being aware of what other people need? Can we spot when my colleague across the desk is starting to get anxious or irritated? Can we start to understand what their tells are, what the signs are that are coming up for them? Because they might not be able to notice that themselves. A lot of this stuff happens on the unconscious level. And what we want is for them to be able to notice that in us. And then we have these nice 5 keys that we can start to build into some activities that we can use together. It's like, okay, noticing that maybe we need to go for a little walk together. Maybe we need to take a breath together. Maybe we need to stretch and do something together. Maybe there are some things that we can work out as a team that we can do that help us to stay in the living area. And it's important, as you said, we're in professional environments. So this is at the service of being able to function within the professional environment. So it's not about therapy, and it's also not necessarily about letting people off the hook, but it is about having an understanding between us that we can care for each other and notice what's needed. And then I talked about a culture of well-being. So from our perspective in the Human Hive, we've defined well-being as the combination of safety, that psychological, emotional safety that we can bring and support in each other, belonging, it's an ability to be included, have safe relationships, be able to co-create and collaborate. And then purpose. It's knowing that you have meaning in the work that you do and the things that you're doing on a day-to-day level. And then your individual identity, whether it's your gender, your sexuality, your race, culture, religion, whatever that might be for you, abilities, disabilities, how does that intersect with your ability to feel safe, to feel belonging, and to feel purposeful in this environment? And if we can create an environment where we're thinking about those things and we're actively working on those things all the time, then that for me is a culture of well-being. That we're taking care of people on all these different levels. So we train in the Human Hive, we train organizations to develop a culture of well-being. And often what we do is that we find people within that organization who act as well-being champions and train them to be those eyes and those ears about what's happening on that nervous system level of the team. Have regular opportunities for the team to come together and debrief and check into how people feel, do fun things together that help us to regulate the nervous system, that help us to build our collective sense of belonging, help us to feel purposeful. Those champions can be really important part of ensuring that everybody feels comfortable and feels as though actually their work environment is a living area for them. Can we create a living area for people to inhabit so that they don't come to work and find themselves constantly in the attic or the basement because they're so overwhelmed or so stressed or so or feel so pressured by the people and things around them. And the more we live in the living area, the wider that living area becomes. It means that we can practice expanding our nervous system so that we can manage more challenging things and be able to stay in control and stay in contact with the prefrontal cortex. That's so it has kind of a longer term beneficial advantages to how you grow in strength as a team, as an organization, because then you can take all the knocks that life gives you in a way that is flexible and human focused.
And I love that concept that you described right at the start there about, if we're working next to each other and being able to pick up on some of those kind of behavioural pieces that might indicate somebody isn't necessarily in the best place.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of the complexities that COVID has thrown to us, and I think that hybrid working and, encouraging more flexible working is an incredibly positive thing. But if we are working in a digital first or a remote, if we're framing it that way, environment, what can we do to kind of pick up on some of those nuances that might indicate somebody might need a bit more support?
Well, it's interesting that the online environment, there are strong tells as well. So this is not in any way saying anything about people who have not got their cameras on today, but starting to notice if people don't show up on camera often, if people don't contribute often through the chat or in other ways, those can be signs that there may be something else going on. I think it's important also, we learned this through COVID, is to have get-togethers that are not just about work, is to be able to connect and reconnect on different levels so that we are maintaining that human connection. And because we're more hybrid now as well, is taking advantage of the times when we are together to check into how people feel and what's going on in people's lives. Because maybe the digital environment is more about let's get on with the work. So thinking about what are the fora that we can create as a organization ourselves that are going to work for us in order to bring people together and check into how people are feeling. And I find also you pick things up in conversation. So if we're thinking about safety, belonging, and purpose, start to listen to the markers that come up in people's conversation. Are they talking about things? Are they talking about their safety? Are they talking about feeling threatened or feeling unsafe or language around that? Are they talking about feeling excluded or included or not having good relationships? That's a belonging marker. Or are they talking about being bored or not really understanding why they're doing what they're doing, or how what they're doing contributes to the bigger thing that we're all doing. That's a purpose issue. So we can start to pick up on the ways that people are feeling unhappy or dissatisfied or threatened within the professional environment through listening to those cues. So it's different. There are different levels and different ways of working about this, but all the time it's coming back to, we have a framework that we use, and we put right in the middle, make room. And it's about making room for people to be human. Can we give a little bit more time, a little bit more space, just to have that human interaction, to check in to how people are and what's going on?
And that checking in piece really makes me think of one particular client that I work with, and they use Slack as an internal comms tool, and they have a RAG channel. So every day each person responds in that channel with a red, amber, or a green heart, and gives some kind of description of how their day went. And over COVID they introduced this moment of joy, and I love it as a concept. And I think what I'm observing with that particular client is people are able to be honest, and they're able to sing about things when they're going great, and they're also able to be really candid. And you know, I was about to use a naughty word there, but my day hasn't gone as I'd like it to. And X, Y, and Z happened. But in reality, if somebody's not feeling safe to share that, I guess we start seeing some of those, you know, quite often we ask them, how are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you? How was your weekend? Yeah, it was fine, thanks. How was yours? Kind of surface level comments that don't really give us much more information. So what can we do as leaders, as people, to create the right environment that people feel that they can be honest, so that we can pick up on some of those cues?
Well, first of all, I love that example that you've just given. I think that's fantastic with the Slack channel. And I very much agree with the ability to celebrate and creating time to celebrate. We don't do that enough. I think part of what shuts us down and helps us to feel unsafe or not included, not purposeful, is acknowledgement of when we've done things really well, we've done things right. So the ability to celebrate is an important part of this as a culture. In terms of us as leaders, I like threes, as you probably would have noticed. So I also think about like 3 levels of attention. Can we place, so the 3 levels of attention are the me level. So what's going on for me or for the individual? What's how am I functioning within this space? How am I able to regulate in this space? What's going on for me within my safety, belonging, and purpose? That's an important level. Then there's the we level, which is our team. Can we put some focus on how is the team functioning? Is the team able to regulate and co-regulate? Is the team being inclusive of each other and purposeful? And then what is the us level, which is how do we interact with the outside world? Who are our customer base, our client base, the community in which we live in and which we support? We can be dysregulated or regulated on each one of those 3 levels, and each of those levels will have an effect on us. So my feelings of safety or unsafety will affect my team around me, and which will then affect our ability to serve our customer client community base. So that's one level through. But we're also very much affected by what's going on by the world around us, the community around us, our customer client base, which then comes back through and has the knock-on effect back to the individual. So as a leader, can we think about how our mental, emotional, biological, psychological, social health is affecting all the different levels and layers of where we're operating as a group and as a team? And then having the culture of well-being is who's there in your team that's really there to spot this with you, who's there as, you know, it doesn't have to be somebody on management level. It's often somebody who's there right there in the team, who has a well-being champion role and is able to observe and take the measure of what's going on, like feel the temperature about what's happening with the people around us, and be able to put things in place really quickly to prevent things spiraling out of control. I'm very, very much about prevention. As a therapist, I'm often I'm often helping people once they've gone past the point of no return, not no return, but once they've gone into their crash and once things are more challenging for them. So I'm very keen, because we don't have enough therapists in our environment. We don't have enough social care. The NHS and the waiting lists are huge at the moment, apart from the expense of that as well. So I'm really passionate about supporting organisations and individuals to do that preventative work internally amongst themselves first. If we can create a self and co-regulating society, then we don't need those services as much. And I know as a body focused trauma therapist, is that psychological, emotional, mental health issues then also come out through as physical health issues. So things that might begin within our emotional state down the line start to affect us physically, begin to affect our digestion, begin to affect our immune system, our ability to actually repair ourselves, affect sleep. And then down the line, you can end up with quite big degenerative diseases, things like cancers and dementia and diabetes. There are now there's lots of research showing the correlation between the wrong kind of stress and developing these kinds of syndromes later in life. So we can be a much healthier society if we are taking care of ourselves more, creating these cultures of well-being and preventing people from getting into burnout before it happens. So spotting those signs early on.
And it's interesting you mentioned the NHS, and as you were talking through some of that, I was thinking about a client of mine that has a senior role within the NHS, and interestingly, we were exploring that visionary leadership, and she gave some feedback. Well, I can't be visionary. Like, the context in which I'm working in would come across as totally inauthentic to be adopting that. And, you know, I think the NHS is probably the most obvious place in terms of visibility, where there are some real cracks that we can observe. But let's kind of play devil's advocate and suggest that, you know, perhaps one of us is sitting here thinking, as a business, we have a lot that we need to do. The environment that we're working within is incredibly pressured. There's economic things that are impacting us. What can they do if they're just thinking, where do I even start with some of this?
Well, I don't wish in any way to minimize what's happening for business at the moment. Everyone, this is a pressured environment. It is, you know, I feel it myself in my own business. But I think it's being able to have enough headspace to recognize what that's doing to yourself on your biological, psychological, and social level. So when I'm working with facilitators or people or leaders, people who hold other groups of people, what we talk about first of all is that safe space begins with you. So your ability to be well regulated and to take care of yourself has this massive knock-on effect on everybody else around you. So as a business leader, as someone who might be leading a team, self-care is not a luxury. Self-care is absolutely essential, because your well-being will have a massive effect on those around you. We talked right at the beginning about that magical invisible cord, that nervous system connection from person to person. If you are kind of the linchpin, if you're the leader of a group, you're holding on to the end of the magical invisible cord of everybody who works for you, with you, in your environment. So if your nervous system is doing that, you can be sure that it's sending that message down to everybody else. And if their nervous systems are doing that, you're holding onto the reins of all of those nervous systems, so it is going to affect you too. So what is self-care for you? It's thinking about what self-care is, and it's different for different people. It's not always a massage or going to a spa. It can be, you know, getting to my football match and playing football. It can be playing music. It can be getting to doing your knitting or your crochet. It can be spending time and making a really nice meal, making sure that you're spending time with people that you love, who can listen to you and hear you and support you in the challenges that you're going through. Self-care is not a one size fits all. It's definitely not the whole idea of kind of yoga and meditation. that could be part of it. For other people, that puts them right into their attic or their basement. So it has to be personalised and has to be designed together. So there's that piece. And then again, how do we then as a community support individuals who have these leadership roles, who are holding other people and who might be right there holding back the tide against a lot of other crisis and dysregulation around them. So as leaders, we can really affect a lot of people around us. We can be in very powerful positions. It's not only like the financial or success side of having a successful business that affects other people. It's who we're being as much as what we're doing. And I think that as we shift out of the kind of me first society that's got us into the trouble that we're in right now, we start to shift more to like a servant leader approach. How you be, who you're being, is going to be more and more important for your success as a business leader within the conventional world that we're thinking about selling a product or selling a service. So that I hope that answers the question. Maybe it's a little existential, but I think that all these things are really important now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're about to hand over to the chat and some questions for those of you that have kindly joined us today. I guess final question from me then, Darren, is what one thing would you encourage all of us to do post this session today?
One thing is to check into your body and see how you feel, not on an ideas level, but actually on a physical level. Can you notice your heartbeat? Can you notice your breathing? And can you notice where and if you're holding any tension or pain in your body? And once you've come into contact with those feelings, what do you need to do to help yourself feel more comfortable and feel more safe? Do you need to take a breath? Very often we don't breathe throughout the course of the day. So can we consciously just take a breath and let it go? In fact, let's all do that together. Breathe in through your nose, and then really let go through your mouth. And again, breathe in through the nose and let go. One more, breathe in and let go. If there's pain or stiffness in the body, can we just release it? Move the shoulders, shift where you are in your chair, wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, give yourself a really good stretch.
So stretching my knees out now, and it's quite therapeutic from removing the cracks from them.
Absolutely. So we might hear some cracks, all sorts of things might happen. So all those, just noticing our body. And if we can do that regularly throughout the day, then we give ourselves an opportunity of staying in the living area, because we'll start to notice on the physiological level if we're starting to get stressed long before the mind does. As I often say in my trainings, it takes time for the mind to catch up with the body. So don't wait until your brain is screaming at you that you need a break. You probably needed that break hours before. So come into the body, come into contact. It takes a couple of minutes just to sit and take a really good breath and let go, to stretch, to feel your feet on the floor, have a little walk around your space, acknowledge for yourself how you feel, and maybe shift your attention. Here's our 5 keys of mates. So use those, take those 5 keys away and build them into your day in little ways that feel manageable and feel possible within your environment. Adapt them to your context and to your personal needs as a unique human being.